Hi, everybody. Good morning. We're just getting started. Let me know if you can hear me. Give me a wave or a sign. Awesome. Jason, Flint, good to see you. Lol, we missed you last week or last time, 2 weeks ago. Good to see you. Awesome. Okay. Nick is recording. Um, where do we start today? Oh, I'll start with a reminder that it's helpful um, well, everybody here has been here before. But if you see this later, just give us turn on your camera, let me know that you have something to say or have a question to ask. And then I just call on people as I remember. I had mentioned I think Instagram and on the newsletter that I wanted to talk today about naturals, especially the naturals that Nick and I have been doing this past week and a half. So that's like a general topic. But if anybody else has any specific questions before we get started that's not related to that, you can feel free to ask it now. Anything else you want to talk about, anything else that's on your mind. And Flint, your microphone is on. I don't know if you want to say something.
No, I won't. But since it's on it, before I turn it off, I'll say I'm excited that Yellow Rooster was able to get me some of your coffee. I look forward to having a chance to roast it, and I'll just be enjoying the conversation from the listening mode without you guys being interrupted by my microphone.
No worries. That's awesome. I'm so glad you got it. So what I wanted to do was give you a little feedback, a little backstory on what we've been doing, and then I'm going to share some pictures that I've been sharing on Instagram. Um, but in case you're not there, Nick is going to add them in the chat. Is that right? So we have put off a lot of our trials for for the end of the season because we're really short on patio space. So as much as we wanted to do trials earlier, one, we had a yeast delay delivery, so we couldn't get to some of the other trials. And then second, we had very cold harvest here in Guatemala, and that's really delayed our drying times. So coffee was on the patio much longer than we'd experienced before. So we are usually drying, or last season we dried coffee, the last 2 seasons, between like 10 and 12 days, we could get the coffee off the patio. And I shared that very first batches that we did, like the first 6 or 7, we got rain. And so those took like a month to dry instead of the 10 days that we originally planned. And in fact, we had to get them off of the patio at like 14% and put them away because they were just taking so long and we really needed to move on. So we actually bagged them up and put them in storage for, what did I say, like a month? Almost a month. 2 months, 2 months, before we just recently brought them back out to finish their like last two moisture points. So we were not going to mess with any trials because we didn't have space on the patio. Things were taking a really long time. This also the season, like I said, it was especially overcast, rainy, moist harvest, and it was not the time to do naturals. That's not the time to like embark on this natural journey. But we were really running out of time, running out of cherry. That we have at least this farm, which is all kind of estate owned, where the producers, the family here doesn't buy from neighbors. Everything we process is just what's on the farms. So the yields were down. So there's a lot less coffee. And I was planning on doing like a couple rounds of naturals and we just ran out of coffee. It was like harvest was going, and then the faucet got turned off. We got a phone call and said like, that's it. So we only got 700 pounds of cherries to do our first initial trial. I was sent some yeast from Lalamond, who makes the Sima and the Intenso brand of yeast, and they have other non-Saccharomyces and some bacteria that they wanted to trial. So they sent me some tiny samples. They've been hanging out in my fridge all season, and we're finally like, okay, we're gonna do some cherry fermentations. And I don't do naturals because philosophy is volume, and it's kind of like doing the easiest thing. And especially in this location, the easiest thing is to do washed. We already have the giant wet mill, we've got the canals, like everything to do that is really easy. I think the pictures are taking a little bit to upload. Can you guys see? Can someone let me know if Nick put one picture in the chat? I don't know if you guys can see it yet, or if it hasn't downloaded, because we might try a different tactic. Okay, you can see it. So perfect. Yes, the first picture is cherries. So then the next picture that we're showing is to do the cherries. Obviously, we want to float because one of the issues with naturals is the inconsistencies. So we couldn't put it through our regular sorting mechanism because then it's so efficient that you put it in, it floats the cherries, and then it goes straight to pulping. And so getting it, like rescuing it out of that system, is really complicated. So we just got one of my fermentation tanks, filled it up with water, and did like a float with agitation. Skimmed off all of the floating cherry and then drained it, and then had to take that coffee back out. I like this step because our coffee was picked the night before. So there's always a 12 to like 14-hour delay. So being able to float this way helped like bring my temperature down of the cherries. It helps kind of lower that microbial load because again, I'm going to be inoculating with something, but I'm not doing like a sterilization or a sanitization step. We're just using water to like lower that load. And then we physically had to take the coffee back out, put it on a truck, and then drive it to the patio. And we actually fermented on the patio instead of in the mill. Why did we do that? We fermented in the patio for two reasons. One was our mill gets really, really cold, and I wanted to have more warmth and like more consistent temperature for these fermentations because they were going to be really small because we split it up into 6 barrels. So part of it was a temperature consideration, and then the other big reason was the labor. So if you can see our mill, it's very much set up with gravity. So there's like 5 like levels, and it's just a lot of stairs. So you're climbing up and down stairs. So bringing 700 pounds up and down and up and down and up and down is a pain. So part of it was logistics. Oh, Paolo has a question. What's up?
My question is on the photo of the beans, colored one, the first photo.
Mm-hmm.
How many hours of fermentation is in this photo? Because this is not this is a fermentation. I don't know how many hours.
So the first picture of the cherries, that is the overnight. So those were picked fresh and then left in the sack for 12, 13 hours. So that would be a 13-hour fermentation.
12 hours changes. So this is the change in for 12 hours. Okay.
Yes.
After fresh, you collect at what time in the morning?
I mean, picking ends at 4 p.m. So they're picking all day long, very slowly.
4 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
in the evening.
Yes.
Ah.
And then they
So
do a little bit of sorting and then bring it to the kind of collection point at the mill.
But so you collect at 4 p.m. The bean have all the day light, so you have a lot of temperature on the plant, no? You collect in the evening, and then you put in the bag and stay all the night.
Correct.
And the day after you start the process.
Yes, that is correct. And that is.
But if you want to make the rest, you want to make this night rest, is you search for this, or is just for because you collect in the evening?
Wait, is that so? That's not ideal. I don't recommend that. That's just I can't get the cherry any sooner, and we wouldn't start at night. So the setup in this mill has to have a 12 to 14 hour like wait. Like it just sits in the bags for that long. If I
Uh,
could
oh,
go ahead.
no, sorry. How many kilo is in the bag?
Maybe 50 kilos per bag.
50, 50,
Mm-hmm.
15.
50.
So
50.
there is no the problem that the pressure put outside the liquid from the bottom of
I
the.
think there is. I think that's enough
Mm.
weight to be able to crush the cherries at the bottom. So I'm not telling you how to do this. I don't recommend this, but this is the
No,
reality.
because it's strange, strange. You usually you say that it's better to have small
Yeah,
quantity. So normally, don't know, 5 kilo, 7, 8. I don't know. Is a fruit bag used in Italy for the fruit? Is the
exactly.
I saw that many use this for not make pressure on the beans, no,
Yeah,
and don't
absolutely.
have the starting fermentation of alcoholic and so on.
Yes, exactly. So what Paolo's talking about are like fruit crates that a lot of other industries use to not smush the fruit. So, strawberries, fruit that's a lot more delicate that you definitely want to keep it intact, use these fruit crates. I would love to have those here at the farm. They don't have them, they don't exist. And again, this was a trial. So, but I definitely recommend that if you haven't done this or if you're interested in doing this or if your normal method right now is to leave them in the bags, definitely look into some of those fruit crates that I don't think are expensive. But it's just
Because
changing. Mhm.
watching the fruit, you see a starting fermentation
Oh, yeah.
during all the yes is
Yeah, this is the
starting
not a good
strong
way.
way.
It's not a good
Yeah,
way to do it.
it is, yeah. See. Especially the different from the top on the bottom of the bags. No, this very.
Exactly. No, it's right. It's difficult for a couple of reasons. One, Paolo is absolutely right. You're crushing the ones on the bottom, so you're already ruining the integrity. What we want is the whole cherry, and when they get smashed, they split open. So you don't have that like secure protection for the next 3-week journey. The other issue is you're releasing that liquid. So not only is it messy, but now you're releasing the inside liquid for the microbes on the outside. And then you have this, the acetic acid bacteria can go off. So you have that vinegar opportunity. You have a lot of alcohol being produced from the yeast. So it's not a way to get a clean kind of natural. The other thing that's not ideal is it raises the temperature. So our cherries are getting really warm. So that's what I was saying. The float helps the next day to bring down temperature back down and kind of modulate, kind of like put the brakes on the fermentation that started. And my goal is to add yeast and inoculate on purpose. So I don't want to compete with the first like 14 hours. And Paolo's right, 14 hours is like when it arrives at the mill, but it's had most of the day, being collected and kind of getting to the mill. So it's more like a 24-hour initial fermentation before the one that I start to control. So it's not a great way to get consistency. It's just how we're starting. So what I wanted to show was the difficulty that it is to do something like this in a place that's not set up for it. Like a lot of Central American facilities are. Central American facilities, the bigger ones were built for wash coffees, and they were built to be really fast and efficient with wash coffees. And then doing a natural, which seems like, well, you're doing less work, there's less steps. When it's not built for that, it's actually more work. So for us, it was more effort, it was more steps to do fewer things. It was like, kind of backwards.
You make also a flotation after you're floating the sherry or no?
Yes. We did float the cherry.
After after the night's rest
After the night
on
of resting.
ah very strange.
Yeah. And that was because it'd be great to do it as soon as they got there, but everybody went home. Nobody was there to do it.
No. And now I make another question because some friend talk about coyote. There was a boy another meeting that talk about coyote that buy coyote, not animal. The coyote that people that buy the cherry from the producer and. The question is from Italy because I'm far from production. Coyote buy the natural bean, the natural fruit, the natural so the same sherry that you show in the photo, no? And after take 1 day, 2 day or trip, and they use what do they use? What they do with the coyote do with this being that buy in the farm around South America? What do you do? Because I don't understand. It's difficult to find some article about this work of strange for us European coffee lovers, strange, crazy old.
Well, I will say that I think coffee cherries hang out in sacks for a long time. I think that is like whether it's on the back of a truck and then once it gets to the facility into like a bodega or into the mill, like they can be in the bags for a really long time. Lowell is nodding his head. I think maybe he has more experience working with a lot of smaller producers in areas and maybe has more experience with coyotes than I do because I really I don't know any.
I probably were coyotes too, but we don't buy cherry. But what I see where I live, we do have a bodega or a middleman that buys cherry. And so what happens is you pick your coffee on the farm all day, and then it's late. So you wait till the next morning, and then you take that coffee up to the coyote and you sell it. And then he puts it on a truck, but he waits till the end of the day, right? And so it sits on that truck, and then he takes it down to a town where there's a wet mill, and probably overnight they're wet milling it. But so that coffee would have sat in the sack um, at least 24 plus 12, right? So at least 36 hours. A lot of the wet mills in that I've seen will work overnight. They start processing cherry, depulping it at 10 o'clock at night after they've received all the day. But most farmers are going to pick all day and then deliver it. And so,
So they
yeah,
give
and that's
a
that's
period of
very
use.
common.
So they try to use the sherry about 36 today, no more than today, 36, 24, 1 today. This is the explanation. Okay.
But I
The
wouldn't
medium
I
be
would say
period
I
is
would
surprised.
say
36.
minimum. I would say minimum 24 hours, but probably
24,
often
yes,
48
maximum
hours.
36. Okay,
Yeah, and
understand.
I
Is
wouldn't say
because
there's a maximum, Paulo. I would say that minimum 24. And if the coffee's in bags for 3 days, like they'll still use it. It's
3 day anche, no?
there's not like a quality control who's of at this point
Yes,
it's
is
volume. They're
C
like
market,
yeah.
C volume mark. Oh, sorry, because it's a very um, underground knowledge that in Europe is difficult to have. This is another word for us.
So I just
The
wanted
funny thing is when you
Sorry.
say this is the best coffee I've ever tasted. Oh my God, what was the process? And it's like treat it like garbage and
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 forget
then
about it and then get lucky.
and forget about it.
Yeah, I understand.
I have one. I have one of
We,
those coffees I haven't
we,
tasted yet, where I picked all my coffee and I just left it in the bags and I just left it sitting there for 2 days, and then I didn't sort it very well, and then it didn't dry very well. What if it turns
no,
out
no,
to be the best coffee I've ever
in
tasted?
Italian blend, we use incredible, terrible coffee, no problem.
There's a
We are
home for
used
every
in
coffee.
Italy. Yeah.
Lucia, can I make a suggestion that if you do this, if you do this trial again next year, that maybe that I think what Paulo is getting at would be really interesting is if you are able to go out and get a bunch of cherry first thing in the morning and maybe put it in a crate as opposed to a bag and see if there is any, because maybe there's not as much influence as we think. Um, but it would be curious if you had some control over some cherry um, in that way.
Yeah. I think that that makes sense in I'd be interested in doing that experiment from the point of view of maybe saying that it may not be that necessary, because what I'm trying to do, what Paolo is saying is like, yes, we're recognizing that these are not the best conditions to do this type of thing. But realistically, this is the way a lot of producers do naturals in Central America. They're staying in the bag. There's not the sorting that we see in Africa because we don't have as many people to be able to do hours and hours of hand sorting. Most of them just kind of rely on a float, if that, maybe not even a float, and they go to dry, and that's it. There's very little attention to these coffees. So I'm trying to take the worst case scenario and see what is the smallest thing that we can do to improve this system. So if I can control the microbes in the tank, can I kind of course correct? Can I do this like small input so that all of my other steps are less relevant? So all of the other best practices that take more effort and take more labor and take more input could maybe become less relevant. So it's using the yeast and the fermentation as like a cheat code to not have to do those best practices. Not because best practices are bad, they're called best practices, but because they're not always available to everybody. So I'm trying to make like the lowest common denominator, the easiest possible natural that we can, using all of the tools that most Central American producers are currently using. So that's why it was okay to have, the cherry being old and pre-fermented, not particularly selected. If you see these pictures, these are horrifying pictures compared to the beautiful cherries that I've seen when we were in Kenya, when I was working in Rwanda. Like the cherries are immaculate. They're perfectly red, ripe cherries. They look like they're Photoshopped. They're beautiful. Because they have a lot of people to make them beautiful. And here we don't. So what I just want to show you
But,
next and explain in the pictures is they're on
but
black
the
plastic.
result, when you have the result of this method could improve the low level, the normality in the production. No, you have this. You are used to collect rest and so on. With the yeast, you correct, give more quality, give more point also at the end at the coffee. This is the what we are searching for.
Yeah, it's more of the philosophy of risk reduction, reducing defects and kind
Risk
of
reduction.
risk reduction versus like, let's find the
Yes.
best, it's like bringing the floor up instead of pushing the top higher. So that's what I'm trying to.
But the question, the problem is the floating, to put away the defect bean, because I saw in the now our Sicily plantation in the greenhouse that some beans, some cherry are perfect, the color perfect outside, but inside we have defect. This is the problem of natural, because natural, I know that SCA don't consider natural as quality coffee, because 50 years ago it was difficult to 20 years ago was difficult to have a quality natural for this problem. For you don't select the beans, and so you dry everything, but you don't know what it is inside. We could have a black cherry, a black bean, and so on. This is the problem, no? So the quality is changed by the floating, the selection of the natural, or not.
I think selection is really important because you have that inconsistency. So yes, stepping back, one of the reasons I don't prefer this method is because you are blind. You are blind because you can't see what's inside the cherry, whether there's insect damage inside, and then you spend all of this effort.
No. Insect, also black beans.
And
I saw black bean inside.
right. And then what I've seen is the compounding effects of so you're blind because you have like a whole fruit versus being able to take off layers and see what you're working with and sort out any defects before you get started on your like long fermentation, drying, storing process. But also, the method that I've seen for fermenting cherries or fermenting whole cherries are the barrels, are the tanks that are completely sealed and with a valve. And so then you're more blind. You have like 3-4 days of not knowing what's going on in your fermentation. So if you see some of the other pictures that I left the barrels open, it's just a plastic on top. So I was constantly opening it up, mixing up the liquid, being able to smell, get my pH, get my temperature, at least see what's happening. So it's just another thing that I want to bring up is that a lot of times with cherries, you're just like blind on blind on blind. Like we're just compounding this. And then kind of what a little bit back to what Lowell was saying is like sometimes you don't know what you did, you kind of ignore it, and then something great comes out. And the issue with that is that it's hard to replicate. If something was great, you're like, how do I neglect it again to that level? Or how do I replicate this magical set of events? So go ahead.
I didn't hear what kind of yeast you use because I was
What kind of what? Oh, what kind of yeast?
Using
I
yeast.
don't even know because they sent me the yeast with like a code name. So it was like LBR12 or so I don't know which ones were Saccharomyces, non-Saccharomyces, or I didn't. There was like I could tell which was bacteria versus yeast, but they didn't tell me the strain. So I don't know at that level because they're just experiments. So they just had experimental code names. So I don't even know what we were trying yet, what we were trialing.
What do you think about the cultivation of yeast of the famous most or the I don't know as they call the selection of the previous fermentation and cultivation of this micro in the farm.
So are you talking about backslapping, kind of using one liquid to the other one?
Yes, so you have a good fermentation. This variety, I take the most of the liquid. I give some sugar to give a long life to this micro. Sorry for my English.
Yeah. I think that's a really great method.
What do you think? What do you think? What is the possibility to give conservation of this micro in the farm?
I think
For many time you could conserve this culture liquid.
I think you could conserve it for quite a while if you're just doing one, like the previous fermentation to the next one. I think that you can really get a good cycle, and you could maybe keep that all season long if you have fresh cherry. If you're harvesting all week long, there's some places like in Colombia, they only process 1 day a week because they collect cherry for 5 days and then they process on Friday or Saturday. So they have a lot of fresh cherry coming in, like they kind of are adding to that big mass. So I think that it's definitely a good solution for a lot of people. I don't do it.
But it's like a sourdough, the yeast that we use for the bread, no? The sourdough, I don't know if it's correct.
Yeah, exactly
So
like the sourdough.
Give life for, there are sourdough that have 100 year old.
That's correct.
The same you could do for the coffee micro.
For your wild fermentations, you could treat it like a sourdough, and you could just keep feeding it and building it up.
Feeding.
Yes, you can feed it.
You select and feed after for long time, no problem for the time. You have to feed, make attention that there will be not changing in the micro situation.
Oh yeah, no, there will be changes, but as you are feeding it, as you are maintaining it, the ones that are strong are going to get stronger and they're going to dominate.
You see.
And so it will change over the season. It will change over time, but it'll be
It changes
less
if you
change.
introduce something different. This is the changes. If you put the end inside, put some other micro inside, there are changes.
Correct. And I just want to be clear for everybody else that this backslopping and this kind of feeding and having a starter culture the way you would have a sourdough is a very good method for a lot of producers for wild fermentations. I don't recommend that with the inoculations that we're doing with the SEMA or the Intensa with the commercial yeast to, buy the yeast once and then think that you can just keep feeding it and keep it alive the whole season, because it will change and mutate and it's just not going to work that way. So it's not that you can't do it, it's that you can't buy one bag of SEMA once and then keep it alive forever. It doesn't work that way. So just that distinction. Lowell asked the question about the pH change during fermentation compared to the natural fermentations versus my depulped fermentations. They were really similar because it's similar microbes fermenting on the outside. So my pHs started, again, they always start at the pH of water here, which is around 5.5. And my ending point was mostly around 4. And there was a couple that got down to 3.9. So actually there was a little bit higher on the lactobacillus fermentations that we did on pulped coffee, on our watch coffee. I was getting down to 3.7, which I know for a lot of people is like very scary territory to get down to pHs that low, 3.6. But because it was a known microbe that is a high acid producer, it's not scary. So I will say it's not about the final pH, it's about how you got there. So if you're doing a completely wild fermentation and then your coffee ends up at 3.5, maybe that's a concern. But because I'm doing an inoculated fermentation with lactic acid bacteria, when my coffee's at 3.5, I'm not worried. And it was one of our when we were tasting our day lots, the lactobacillus 3.5 final pH were our favorites, were our personal favorites, that if I had a different philosophy, I would pluck that out and have that be its own micro lot of 12 bags. But that's not what we're trying to do here. We're making a blend, we're making a whole, so that 12 bags makes the whole a little bit better. Anyway, so I just wanted to keep just pointing out the pictures because some of them, again, are very non-traditional. Most of the time when you do a cherry fermentation, you do it with a sealed barrel with a, anaerobic environment. But what I was just showing is because I'm adding extra microbes, I don't need to do that step. My fermentation is still anaerobic in there and I'm able to not be so blind. We're blind because we can't see what's inside the cherry, but I'm also eliminating that step of being blind, of not being able to see into my fermentation vessel. So as my pH is dropping and it's getting into the danger zone of below 4, if my fermentation is still active, I'm seeing a lot of bubbles. It smells great. It smelled like these amazing peaches. I'm not worried that something's going wrong. So I'm also getting other input from numbers and my senses. The next thing you can see is Nick, what we had to do to wash. We were trying to figure out how do we end the fermentation. So we just strained the cherries. We dumped the liquid and strained the cherries as best as we could. And you can see also the color being soaked in water will take away a lot of the pigment. So you see that variation in pigment a lot more as well. And because you have all of this pigment and our patios are for wash coffees, I didn't want to stain and ruin our patios. So I put down the plastic to be able to kind of protect our patios. And also because we're still having some threats of rain, we thought if we need to wrap up the coffee, we don't want to be panicking about that. So that's why we put it under the plastic, which is concerning for high temperatures. So that black surface versus the white concrete was raising our temperatures really quickly. So we were very much on top of mixing and putting out the shade and making sure that our temperatures were not going above 32, 35. So it's possible to do. So I'm not saying you need to dry on plastic. That's not great. I would love to have raised beds, but we're not going to put in the infrastructure to build raised beds. Like we're just kind of working with what we have. Let's see, what else can I tell you? Those those wood dividers were like a last minute addition, and because the wind is really strong right now, we actually needed to use those cinder blocks to keep the plastic down because the wind was just hauling all kinds of material up. I showed an Instagram story last week, no, a couple weeks ago, but we had one of the the laminas, what are those called? A roof panel, like just kind of fly off one of our in our garden area because the wind is just very strong right now. So now the coffee's been drying for a couple of days, and we've just really are working on moving it, mixing it. And again, I still feel very blind because it's not our parchment. Our moisture reader is not as good, as effective as reading it. We don't trust it to read cherry because it's not calibrated to cherry. So that's a little bit of our challenge right now. So actually, question for Lowell, how do you do the moisture on naturals that you guys do? Or anybody else? I see Pranoy is here. I don't know if Pranoy has time, if he's just hanging out and listening or has a chance to say hi. But go ahead, Lowell.
I don't have any experience with naturals. We have a machine where you can use the natural, but ultimately you just have to dehull it. But I would do that with parchment too. When you get like, I don't know what moisture reader you have, but ours has a natural
Setting.
on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I haven't. I mean, with parchment coffee, I've done thousands and thousands of. With naturals, I've done very little. So at the end of the day, you just get to a point where you dehull a bit, check it out.
Yeah. Right. And these trials are so small. I don't want to dehull like every day because with my parchment, I can check it every single day during all of those days. So I don't want to use that much sample. So like I said, I just feel a little bit more blind and I'm not used to it. But Pranoy, it's so good to see you. I know you're in your harvest too, and you've been really, really busy. So it's really nice to have you join us.
Good to be here. And actually wanted to put my camera on. You spoke about talking about mosto and sourdough, and so to give you guys context, today is the 100th day of our harvest, and it's never been. I mean, it has been once, but not regularly has it gone this long. And we're about 2 days away from finishing. And yeah, to answer your first question about checking moisture, I got a new meter this time for which you can change the settings for with parchment on, green beans, or with cherry, and that was really helpful. But I found that we got a little sample huller, and there was a zero point 0.5 to 0.75 difference in moisture reading. So I didn't the in cherry moisture content on the meter. I didn't take. I mean, I was like, okay, we got to double check before we bag. And yeah, going back to what I was talking about, I actually reused Mosto for 62 days this year, and I used it every single day for all my wash coffees. And there were times where I was like, okay, we've gone too far, but I just went with it anyway on small lots. And because it was frothy, it was smelling not like in the past. I've had kind of like an acetone smell, and I know that's kind of like stressed microbes or suggests stressed microbes, but it wasn't that. It was just smelling really funky. And so then I kept them aside and actually we've got like an old freezer that we used to use for meat back in the day, and I just turned the setting down a bit. I didn't close it fully as well, so I started cooling my mostos, and that was a way to um, yeah, not let it ferment too fast, but keep feeding it. And yeah, I think I cracked a good ratio. All I think about 92% of Arabica this year was washed, and so I think and all local or native microbes only. And yeah, it was quite fascinating because I was worried about these, and I kept kind of set these lots aside where the mosto was smelling a bit off, but they were super consistent. And something that I realized and I didn't think about. Sorry, my chair is a bit creaky. Something I didn't realize and I thought about is the use of Mosto and also like what the photo that you put up with the cherries turning yellow.
Mm-hmm.
You could probably describe them as they've been leached of colors, and so whatever's in the tank or the barrel after are the leachates. And so mainly the pigment is anthocyanin, and that's what I'm adding back to some of my mustos. And I realized actually Christopher was here in Feb, and we talked about it. We both realized that it's probably um, this anthocyanin that's being added to the mosto is actually helping shelf life because it has antioxidant properties, and that kind of blew my mind, to be honest, because I get a lot of feedback saying our wash coffees stay for like 12, 14 months if below around 10% and 2.45 water activity. But yeah, sorry, I said a lot just then.
No, that's great. And I think that's really interesting too, because traditionally, or what I know from Borem's work, is that naturals don't in general have as long of a shelf life as wash coffees do. So if there is a way, if there is some connection to the anthocyanins, giving it some like oomph, some boost of antioxidants, I think that would be really interesting. I wanted to ask you about, you're doing 92% washed. Is that the ratio that you've had before?
It's probably about 85 last year.
Okay, I thought you were doing more other processes.
Actually, yeah, maybe about 80, but like not more, not less than that.
Okay.
I stopped doing honeys unless absolutely necessary. But I didn't do any this year. I did more of a semi-washed, which is the green beans now when I roast them look a bit like honeys, but nah, not the same process. But yeah, I just found that also from a positioning perspective that in India, to be honest, in my opinion, there's not many good wash coffees, and I think that's where we make our mark and as a farm, and so yeah, and also have these expressive coffees, and it sort of ties back into um, good practices equals good soils equals good microbes and good ferments, and so that's what I've been trying to push in the sort of thought process that I've been on.
No, I love that. And I also like that you're reducing your percentage of honeys. I think honeys should be like in emergencies only. It should be left
Yeah,
for if you're your last resort. Um,
yeah.
I think the other thing I wanted to mention from what Pranoy is sharing with us is that the like you're such a great candidate for backslopping. You're such a great candidate because you've had this land for a very long time, multiple generations. You have a lot of micro diversity. So you also have other crops. So there's a rich environment to pull from for your micro like cocktail. And you also have a really long harvest so that you could have inconsistency. So this helps you keep those consistencies. I think my concern is where the conversation goes towards that's more like that's the ideal, that everybody should strive to have their own microbes. And I think that that's not the reality for a lot of places where coffee is new and maybe hasn't been growing for a really long time, where maybe or it was another crop. Maybe it used to be tobacco, maybe it used to be corn, maybe it used to be something else, and there's not a rich history of microbes for coffee appropriate, or there's not that micro diversity, or maybe you don't own the farm, so you don't know, you're buying cherry, so you don't know what other people are putting in and what neighbors are doing, so you may not want to like amplify and grow up that culture. So I love what Pranoy is doing. It's super appropriate, but it's not, I think I just want to avoid like everybody thinking like that's the right way to do coffee, or like the only way, or we should strive towards that, because it's a very specific reality that not a lot of people have. But if it works, I think it's awesome. I think another thing that I want to highlight that Prannoy did was using the freezer or the refrigerator, being able to cool your starter culture down, being able to control it a little bit more, like again, like the accelerator and brake, being able to have some kind of container for that is really helpful. Trying to think of what else. Mostly that. Really quickly, Prannoy, can I ask you if you did any microscope analysis? Were you looking at how your starter was changing?
No, I haven't got to that level yet. I think I'd like to do that next year. But there's another producer, Mr. Ashok, who's about an hour away from me, who's gotten super into it. And Dave is actually going to be here. Dave Stanton's going to be here next week, and we're going to go there together.
Oh, you
So
lucky duck. That's
yeah,
awesome.
it's wild. It's like a nuclear power plant. His facility, and but yeah, I think I went more. Oh yeah, I should say also with the Mostos, what I did was I some of them I exposed to air. I just used kind of like a mesh. I let it breathe like you would with like tepache, for example. Um, but also at the same time, some Mostos I kept airtight. And so I know it's a bit of guesswork, I guess, but like my thought process was the one that's kind of aerobic will have a little more bacterially dominated um, microbes, and so but like again, I haven't gone into it, but like I found a lot of value there, and to go back to your previous point, I agree. I think this is not sort of possible or applicable for everyone. It's really not. And my neighbors just over here, I know, and they tell me about their soils and how when the previous owners pumped them with all kinds of chemicals and whatever. And it isn't, but I felt like, I don't know if it's just in India, but like everyone's been on this my sort of commercial micro bandwagon, and I can see a lot. I have seen a lot of them in my short career try specialty and then back out of it because they're like, nah, it's too much. And I'm like, it's not much more, if you really do it and you set these protocols. But I agree, like it's just different ways of going about it.
Could I ask you to take some pictures and share them with the group in the next Discord in a couple weeks? Because I would love to see their facility or how someone else is doing that.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Well, we've made it to the end of our hour, and normally I would love to stay on, but we have we have to go check on our coffee. So thanks everybody for joining. Thanks for hanging out. This was a really fun one. I hope next to have an update from Prannoy and some cool pictures. See you in 2 weeks.